Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to our June pop-up lecture series. I'm Ellen Briggs, founder and president of Protect Our Past, and we are a nonprofit based in Chatham. And our mission is to protect historic properties, media, to educate and create an awareness that we need to save these historic, iconic properties that make the Cape and the islands what they are. And we're known as the loudspeakers of historic properties. So we use film. That's our number one tool. And I'm just going to encourage you to see what we've recently completed, which is the Sail Off series. And you can find that on protectourpast.org. Tonight, we kick off our first, and hopefully we'll have many more, but tonight begins the fundraiser online auction that you can find on our website, again, protectourpast.org. And it's called Raise Your Paddles for Pop. And we have a lot of experiential items. There's one that you may be really interested. I would love to do it. So I may have to bid against you. But you can fly across the nautical plane, or nautical path, that's the word I'm looking for, that the Mayflower took when it came in toward the Cape, and then it went down to Chatham and up to Provincetown. And there are before and after events also that are way cool. So I highly recommend that you go to our website, protectourpast.org, and take a look. And there are lots of easy ways to enter your bid, and let's get it going. We need to raise some money to make lots more films so that we can save historic properties on the Cape and Islands. So we appreciate you joining us for our lecture tonight, and it's a really special one. It's really timely, as it turned out. It's not something we've planned, except we just knew we wanted to have Nils Bockmann here in June, and he is going to talk to you about the research he does, but primarily about his book called The Jonah of Cape Cod. And oh my goodness, we have another Jonah of Cape Cod as of last Saturday, and we'll speak to that as well. But these are now two gentlemen that we know of that were swallowed by a whale and lived to tell the tale. Of course, they're very different circumstances, and I think Nils will definitely address that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I just want to tell you briefly about our lecture. He holds an MA from Suffolk County in English and in writing. He's a professor of English composition at the Four Seas, and he's worked and published articles in the Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. He's also been in The Right Stuff, The Main Street, The Sea Change, and the Jonah of Cape Cod is his first biological historical book, or historical biography, I should say. He grew up in South Yarmouth and lives with his wife in Mashpee. After he finishes his informative lecture, we're going to take your questions. There's a place that you can do that by going to the chat space. Be sure and type them, and we'll look and we'll answer every single one of them. I think it's going to be a lively conversation, particularly with the recent swallowing of a whale, by a whale. I am really tripping over my words tonight. I'm so sorry. When you're swallowed by a whale and live to tell the tale. So, lecture is being recorded, and let's get started. Nils, is that how I pronounce your name, Nils?
Yep.
Nils Bockmann, take it away.
Okay, Nils. So
Caroline?
you can start the screen share on your end now.
Okay, and then, this is what we went through the other day. I'm trying to figure out,
There you go.
start my PowerPoint.
Yeah.
You got it.
And maybe we'd suggest that the rest of us mute ourselves just to prevent any excess feed.
Okay, so you see the opening page? All right. This is about Peleg, the Jonah of Cape Cod. And I'm sure all of you have been in this situation, right? You're on board your whaling ship. You're working on the crew. It's very cold. You're up in the Arctic. and your pocket watch freezes up and stops working. And the reason, Caroline, now I'm gonna explain why you see this picture. The reason it froze up was because they used olive oil to lubricate the pocket watches, and that didn't work very well. It made them inaccurate. So the solution was this fellow named Ezra Kelly from New Bedford decided to try using some sperm whale oil in a watch. And son of a gun, that cured the problem and made watches accurate, made them work in all sorts of weather conditions. So it ended up being a huge business. This is where the knives come in. The knives were huge in the whaling industry. They were whaling captains and ship owners and merchants and just all over it. But this one fellow who was kind of a snake oil salesman type of nye took Kelly's idea and just expanded on it, really blew Kelly out of the water through merchandising. And so the Nye Oil Company became the largest company in the world for using whale oil for all sorts of things like clocks and stuff. By the way, the Nye company is still in business. They used to be in New Bedford, but they're now in fall across the way. I can't think of the name of the town. And you can go visit the factory. They have something like 2,500 patents. And of course, it's all synthetics now. They're not using whale oil anymore. But you can go in, they'll give you a tour, but they don't talk much about the whaling industry unless they're pushed into it because it's not politically correct. So, so these were just some of the things that they developed. And you can see the picture there of that the capturing of the whale was a big deal in this company. They used it in their all their advertising, and hugely successful. So this is Peleg Nye. This is the only picture that we have of him. This came from one of his great nephew, who is also in the Nye Board of Directors, Nye Family Association Board of Directors. I think this picture was taken sometime around 1840, because he's wearing what it looks like he's wearing a uniform, and that would not have been something that he used on Provincetown whalers. This might have been when he was in New Bedford. So just for comparison, this is the Charles W. Morgan, and this is a big whaling ship. Peleg served on ships like this for 2 tours out of New Bedford, and then he switched to Provincetown. Provincetown took a different approach. At the height of the whaling industry's story, big ships like this were what went out of New Bedford. But when Provincetown started having a problem, they were kind of out fishing the area. And so they decided to go into the whale business too. So what they did was they took their fishing ships and made them so that if the fishing wasn't good that year, they could convert it very quickly into a whaling ship. And they would go out, and they did much shorter tours, where a whale ship, the longest whaling ship voyage that I know of was 10 years. And they went up into the Arctic. These guys were usually out there for 6 to 8 months. It happened the one that Peleg was on when he met the whale was a longer voyage that had lasted over a year. But this is pretty much what the ship would have looked like that Peleg was on. So Nathaniel Philbrook, I love this quote. He said, "There are ways you had to go. The prevailing winds blew you to the east, and so you'd follow those to the Azores and the Cape Verde Islands." Nathaniel Philbrook also said this is probably the worst endeavor mankind ever undertook to make a living. It was so disgusting. So this is basically what these guys were doing. I took the took the captain's log in there when they were taking their readings and plugged it into Google Earth, and you can see where the ship was going. And basically, I realized that once they had come down from Massachusetts and swung around Bermuda, they just kept going back and forth between Bermuda and Africa, hoping that they would find a whale or whales to hunt. But there are also a lot of, not a lot of ships out of Provincetown, maybe 30, but there are also a lot of New Bedford ships out there too. So word would get out, there are whales, we found whales. And it happens that when Peleg ran into his whale, they were down off the Cape Verde Islands. So this is basically what chasing a whale looks like. And you can see that there are signs of injury to the whale. And one of the things about chasing a whale in these ships was that you always see, them throwing a harpoon, making fast to the whale. So that was just catching it. That wasn't killing it. That wasn't slaughtering it. That was just how they got in contact with it. And in the Provincetown Museum, there's a huge kind of very sharp implement. What they tried to do is come up behind the whale and cut the tail so that it couldn't thrash. But they didn't have that. Didn't do that successfully in Peleg's meeting with his whale. So this is actually more accurately what it looks like what happened with Peleg. And that nasty little gun that you see down there was a brass firearm. And the thing below it is a projectile that it shot. So shooting the firearm itself would ignite a fuse, and the projectile would go into the whale and explode, and hopefully for these guys kill it. Peleg shot the whale once, and it didn't do enough damage. The second time he shot it, they got in closer to it. Unfortunately, they were close enough to it that the whale's tail actually came up and hit the front of Peleg's boat. Peleg fell into the water, and the whale's mouth was open. Peleg fell into the whale's mouth, and it closed with Peleg inside the whale's body and his legs sticking out between the teeth. And it went down about 3 fathoms. And they were down for at least 10 minutes. So kind of like the story we've heard in Provincetown this week. But eventually the whale floated up, the whale's body came up, and Peleg's body came up next to him. And the captain said, Peleg was pretty much gone, but they did get him back on ship. They revived him, which he wasn't particularly happy about. He said there were times in the recovery that he wished they had just let him go. But the whaling captains were the ones who also acted as doctors. They didn't really know what they were doing. They just tried stuff. And in modern day whaling, his legs injuries were bad enough. And I got this from the guy who's the official physician aboard the USS Constitution. But he said in those days, the men were so important that the very last thing that they would do is cut off a leg, amputate. They would much rather try to save him. So they did manage to save Peleg, but the poor guy had to recover on board a whaling ship for the next 8 months before they got back home. So he said later in life that he figured he came as close to slipping his knot as any man was gonna. So the question to me was, one of the questions I wanted to ask is, how big is a sperm whale? And this gives you an idea of the size of the boats compared to a sperm whale. But it still wasn't quite what I wanted. So this is the size of a sperm whale. And it's almost the same weight. And then in comparison, down in the bottom is the size of the little whaling boat that these 6 guys were in chasing the whales. So it's amazing that they would kill a whale, latch onto it, And then with these little boats, they'd row to get back to the whaling ship where they could start taking the whale apart. So it was a great story. Was it a great story? Well, I thought it was a cool story, and it was part of an actors or readers theater at the community college that I got this story from. I went down and asked our archivist. I said, I need a story about the sea to do a reading, and she said, I think you'll find this interesting. And I did, but I didn't know I was going to find it worth 20 years of interesting. But the problem was, it wasn't the story itself that caught my attention. It was the thing that two biographers in 1939 had written the story, and it was kind of in an encyclopedic type of thing. It was, a story that was mentioned about in the Barnstable of the Centuries of a Cape Cod town, and that was Donald Trazer, who's was a famous fellow here in the Cape of the Trazer Museum. And then Dr. C.E. Harris, who was in Hyannis, and he put together this little story about Hyannis sea captains. And because Peleg had moved from Sandwich to Hyannis Port, Harris included his story in the book. What bothered me was there were no citations, and the stories were almost exactly word for word the same stories. So that's what got me started on trying to find out what was going on. So both stories had said that he was on board a ship named the C.W. Lewis. I couldn't find anything about it. And I wrote to the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and the response was, I couldn't find it because it wasn't the right name. It was actually the George W. Lewis. And once I got that opened up a whole new world of stuff to think about. So then the Whaling Museum also said they didn't know anything more than that. That was in 1998. 2002, I wrote to them again just to see, and they said, it's unbelievable. We just acquired the Kendall collection, and this captain's logbook is in there. And this was a story that told me this was a story that just meant to be written. Every time I asked a question, I got the answers to it. So I went down to New Bedford, and if any of you have done research on microfilm, you know what it's like trying to read microfilm. And this was microfilm that was taken from a logbook that was written on board a rocking ship in the 1800s. And this was the first page I saw, and I went, oh man, this is going to be nuts, because it was 250 pages. But as I went to the next page, I realized it was easier to read. The captain had great handwriting. It was very understandable. And it took me a while to get used to the lingo. But so I had to hold the story. And then as I started going through the logbook, I realized that there are all these little pictures that meant things. That if there's a picture of a porpoise, it meant they'd caught a porpoise, or of a blackfish, they'd caught a blackfish. If there was a portion of a tail going down into the water, they had seen it, but they didn't catch it. If there was a portion that showed, then it meant that they chased it, but still didn't get it. But then there's that big picture at the bottom. That's a sperm whale. And it had a harpoon in it. And I found this on one of the early pages, and I realized that if Peleg's story is in there, that's all I have to do right now is look for the sperm whale with the harpoon in it, because that tells you that they caught it. So this is actually the picture from the entry into Peleg Nye's story. And you can see the harpoon in the back, and under it says 90 barrels. They get 90 barrels of oil. But when you look up front in the mouth, you'll see it's a little unusual. It's got a little guy in the mouth, and that's Peleg Nye. And that was great. So I had the citation, I had the book, I had more questions. I was still stuck on who wrote this story. And I found this in 1946 Yarmouth Register. And it's, I'll read it quickly, but Captain Peleg Nye, who died in Hyannis at the age of upward of 80 years, was widely known from the fact of his having been swallowed by a whale like Jonah of old. An account of this adventure written by Mr. James Otis was published a few years ago. And then it tells the story. And so my question was, number one, who's James Otis, and has the story survived, the article? I have an unusual relationship with doing computer research. My name, I'm the only Nils Bockmann in the world. So when I can't hide. So I put in James Otis thinking, this is great, I'm gonna find this guy. And who do I get? I get 2 million hits about James Otis, the patriot, no taxation without representation. So I knew I had some work to do. So I started looking for him. And I looked at the people who had written about him. And Peleg Nye died in 1896 in Hyannisport. Donald Trazer was born in 1902, so he certainly didn't know him. Dr. C.E. Harris didn't come to town until 1898, so he didn't know him. And James Otis was a famous American patriot, so I really had to chase him. And who was the Hyannisport James Otis? Well, this was the first thing I found, Massachusetts birth records. James Otis, born in 1858 in Roxbury, Massachusetts. His family, of course, had a lot of money. And James Otis' father, Theodore, was unique. He was the one and only mayor of Roxbury before it became part of Boston. So this is a picture of James Otis and his wife sitting next to a neighbor's house in Hyannisport. It's a heck of a photograph because it's dated January 65 and they both died in 1945. So I finally realized somebody had taken a picture of a picture and then had it reproduced. But I called the Hyannis Library and I said, do you know anything about James Otis? And they said, oh, sure, And it turned out that they were having a 101st anniversary of the establishment of the library. And the Ura Hinckley building, which is the old house in front of the library, was donated by James Otis. So I figured they would know a lot about him. And she said, yeah, come on down. And I went into the library and they knew nothing. They had nothing, not a file, not an iota of real information. So I started chasing him. This was a house that James Otis had built in Hyannisport and called Mariner's Rest. And this is just the timeline, but on September 21st, 1886, Peleg has nearly completed his house in Hyannisport that he built after retiring. And James Otis came to town as breaking ground for that house that I just showed you the picture of. So there was a real possibility that these guys actually had met. And as the research went on, it turns out they went to church together. They were both Masons in the same lodge. So sometime or other, James Otis talked to Peleg Nye and wrote about his story and put it in a magazine. So the Red Star is where Peleg Nye built his house in Hyannisport. Just underneath that is actually where the Kennedy compound is. So if you've ever gone down Scudder Avenue and turned down towards Ocean Avenue where the Hyannisport Yacht Club is, that's where Peleg Nye built his house. So it drove me crazy because I had worked at Old Harbor Candle. That was my first job. I drove by his house every day, and it took me 50 years to find out that I was who he was. So this is the picture that's looking down towards the Yacht Club. This is Peleg's house on the left, and on the right is the fencing that sits behind the Kennedy's house, Ethel Kennedy's house. And this is what Peleg's house looks like now, but we don't have a footprint for what the original house was like. But the owner of the house, who rents it out during the summers, lives behind it and was kind enough to take me through and show me the house. So I got to be in Peleg's house. And this is Peleg's headstone, which is in the Oakwood Cemetery in Hyannis. It's about a mile away from where he lived as an adult with his wife, Eliza. And it's funny, we know nothing about her. So I started following in Peleg's footsteps. And if you're going down 6A, you leave Sandwich and you start heading towards Barnstable, you'll see the sign entering Spring Hill. And this is where Peleg was born, where he grew up. And this sign is actually right across the street from one of the houses that he grew up in. This is the original house. His father bought this in the end of the 1700s. It's known today as Hedgerow. You may have seen the signs if you're going down 6A, and this is the house that Peleg was born in. But his father, Heman, was a very successful shipping captain, a merchant marine. But he had problems in the 1820s and had to sell this house and built this smaller house down the road, which is right directly across from the Spring Hill sign. And of course, you can't, it's so overgrown now that you can't see out beyond the house like you can in this picture. But this picture is still in the family. This is now owned by Irving Freeman, who's on the Nye board of directors. That's his great aunt Annie in front of the house. And just for a little aside, there's a road that runs where she's standing. There's a driveway that runs down, and he's had problems over the years with tourists trying to drive down the driveway and driving down the trail. And what they do is ended up being stuck right where the railroad tracks, because that's where the railroad comes through. So you can't get there anymore. This is what the house looks like now, and that between those two trees and on the right-hand side of the house is where the trail goes down to the water. It's unbelievable people try to drive through there. So in search of Peleg, I started looking, just for anything about the Nye family. I had to learn more about them. And this was an article that was written in 1960, and the woman sitting here is Peleg's niece. And she's just retelling the tale about, what had happened with Peleg. And down below her knees are his captain's chest. And we don't know what happened with that. In a couple of years after I'd written the book, I got a phone call from a woman named Polly Marchant, who's in her late 80s. And she was part of the Marchant family that had owned all of what became Hyannis Port. And she was Peleg's great-great-grandniece. And so I learned a lot more about him from her, and that was just awesome. So this is the last thing I could find about Peleg's adventure, and this is from March 1990 in a book called Cape Cod Legends and Tales, and it just retells his story. But they didn't do any more research as to the original, the origins of the history. So this is what I love doing, is because I have the captain's logbook, I can tell you what happened 157 years ago today, where they were. And the schooner G.W. Lewis was on the Charleston grounds off Charleston, South Carolina, or North Carolina. And all this day it was calm, a little air from the northward. There's plenty of small fish around, every kind but whales. Heard that a lot. These guys, it wasn't a real successful trip. No current here, but an old sea coming from the southeast. But in the meanwhile, the Civil War was going on. And on this date in 1864, the Battle of Petersburg had begun a couple of days before. And it was the longest battle of the Civil War. It was over the railroads connecting Petersburg and Richmond, some point south and west, and involved more than 180,000 soldiers and produced 60,000 casualties. The following year, in 1865, of course, things started quieting down as the war wound down. It actually became safer to be a ship out on the water, but they had problems over the years with, being stopped by Confederate ships, Union ships, and they had a real close call. They had a couple of close calls with the worst of the Confederate ships who would have taken them, set their ship on fire, and set these guys off on an island someplace. So at this time, the George W. Lewis's Mystique, I put this in because this is a real connection to history that we all know. And, this is a couple of 6 weeks after Lincoln was assassinated. And they're anchored at Kingston. The sad news reached here of the assassination of President Lincoln. All the Americans in port have had colors at half-mast all day. And meanwhile, of course, poor Peleg is down below decks recovering. On Saturday, June 17th, 1865, 156 years ago, they were on the Hatteras grounds heading home. They saw whale spouts. There were sperm whales. They got a couple of them, which was nice, set them to boiling, and were out of the Gulf Stream. They killed fowl today, which means the chickens that were on board, they killed them so they would be finishing them off. They were getting close to home. Still dangerous being out there. Union soldiers are heading from landing at Galveston with the news that the war had ended and the enslaved were now free. But the problem was that this ship, which was the most dangerous of the Confederate ships, the Shenandoah, didn't get the news until June 22nd that the war had ended. They were still out there, still chasing Union ships, and they never turned themselves in. They went to England, and in England they were considered heroes. The British supported the South during the war, and the ship ended up being turned into a maritime vessel, and was successful. They surrendered to the British authorities in Liverpool on November 6, 1865. So this is the George W. Lewis's Homeward Bound. This is the July 6, 1865. They saw the east end of Long Island, distance of 18 miles. And at 8 p.m., they passed abreast of Block Island, and that was the last entry. I knew that they came in on July 8th because there's this wonderful book called The History of the Whale Fishery by Alexander Starbuck. And that tells us they arrived at Provincetown on July 8th. They had 71 barrels of sperm oil, 100 barrels of whale oil. And for a small ship, that was a successful trip for Provincetown, folks. So December 1866, he became Captain Peleg Nye. And he retired in 1871. The thing that killed me, I made 16 corrections to the Nye genealogy writing this book. Because they said he never went back to sea. Well, he took about a year to recover, and he actually went back to sea chasing whales as the captain of his own ship 4 times before he retired. So in 1866, he built a home in Hyannisport. James Otis moved from Boston to Hyannisport, and Peleg lived to be 1896. He lived to be 79 years old, and I'm sure that he had the conversation with James Otis. And there was a story in the Patriot that said that Peleg liked to sit in the town square and show the scars on his legs to the young boys who just love that stuff. So this is an invitation to all of you from the Nye Family Association. I'm on the board. I'm the association clerk. And these are our 3 buildings that are on Old County Road in East Sandwich. And the big house on the left is our museum. That house was built in 1865 by, oh boy, Benjamin Nye. And the building in the middle was a Grange Hall that was built on that property in 1880. And on the left is a mill that we brought back. The Nye family brought it from another town in 1880 and had it put on a 1666 foundation that was still there. And we've saved that. We restored it last year. These are just a few pictures. We're right down the road from Titcom's bookstore, which is probably if you've driven down 6A, that's a kind of iconic. So we're right down the road, about a mile from there. There's the house close up. There's a freshwater river running down the right side of the house. In the back is Scorton Creek, which is salt water, and the railroad runs behind it. And the black and white picture in the center is that house back in 1880. This is just another picture of the property. We have all sorts of stuff going on. We're going to be opening up next week on Thursday. So if any of you would like to come and visit us, you're certainly welcome to. This is what the mill looked like before we restored it. And we just have a lot of neat stuff going on. And, oh, I didn't realize I was this bad. Admission is free. And we're open Saturdays. This was, just wanted to tell you, this was a book that I was heavily mentioned, and Brian Murphy is from the Washington Post. He just recently won a Pulitzer Prize, and I helped him research this because he heard about Peleg Nye, and he helped me sell a lot of books. And where am I going here? And that's it. That's the tour of Peleg Nye. So I'm going to stop this and start taking questions, if any of you have any questions.
Thank you, Nils.
You're welcome.
That was very interesting. And we could type our questions in, or
Well, if you
feel free to jump in, anyone. But I have a question.
okay.
And maybe you made reference to it, but how long did you take to do the research and then the writing?
It took me about 6 years. The thing that amazed me is I would step back from the story because I just felt I always wanted more information. My grandmother is a research historian at Harvard. It's just inbred. You know, I learned that if you had a question, answer it, you know. So this book, every time I went to look for something, I found it. I didn't even have problems finding things, and people were helpful. And I helped other people find stuff, and it just begged to be written. It had to be written. So we finally got it done in 2014. And the only mistake I made was I published it on Amazon, and I'm sorry that I did that, but they control the ISBN. So, but I may do a second version. I've had letters from 5 people who bought it when they're at the Nye Museum, and they bought it for their grandsons. And I've heard that 5 8th graders did their book reports on Peleg Nye. So I know young boys like that story.
And older women. I loved it. I loved it. I read through it back in, I don't know when, February maybe.
Yep.
I could not put it down. It was so well done.
Yep.
And as I said to you the other day, it reads like a novel,
Yep.
even though it's all research. It's amazing how well you are able to take research information and make it, really captivating.
It was fun doing the Reader's Theater because I dressed up in costume
Oh,
and I acted it out. And I had a harpoon, and every time I would thump it, people would go, the audience, but it's just when people hear the story, they love it. It's so unusual. And as far as we know, I mean, this is the only documented case of this that I know of, that the Whaling Museum knows of. Anybody. So yeah, I have to go talk to the guy in Provincetown. But
Yeah.
I am just amazed that he was down so deep and in that mouth for so long and recovered to be a captain of a ship. So he obviously didn't have, I don't know what magic those captains use to make him recover. How do you live through something like that and still have your mind and body intact?
well, I think all of you, being who you are and the interests that you have, will understand where I come from this. I believe that what saved him is the fact that the whale is a mammal. So when he was in its mouth and the legs were sticking out, whales breathe air. That's why it came to the surface. That's why they shot it. So I think that, and just the mass of the whale's body itself, protected him. If he wasn't crushed, he didn't lose his hearing, all those things that we heard about last week being a potential of falling into the mouth of a whale. I just think he was very lucky. And he kind of said that too.
I'm sure he did. Well, the incident in Provincetown with the lobster diver,
Yep,
he was in a humpback whale
he was.
and Peleg was in a sperm whale. So was there a difference there that would make a difference?
It makes a difference in the size of the whale. The humpback's a smaller whale. Sperm whales have teeth, whereas the humpback has the baleen. I absolutely think the story is right that the humpback, just his mouth was open and he was finishing, and there was all of a sudden this human came in and he spent the next 40 seconds trying to get rid of it, because that's not not something that probably had ever happened to that whale before. But the other thing is too, it's just whales. There are no whales out there that their gullets are not made to swallow a human being. It just wouldn't happen,
There's a question about how did the story come to land? Were the sailors ever recorded?
No, I mean, this happened in 1865. To the best of my knowledge, I've seen other things that alluded to the fact it became an international story, even in those days. But I'm sure it was spread by whaling ships, going overseas. There was an Englishman named James Bartley who claimed to have had the same experience in the late 1800s. And people interviewed him as his body was all bleached. And he became very famous. He did tours and gave talks and everything. And years later, his wife spoke up and said that was bull. It was crap. He and the guys on his ship, 5 guys, decided to do this just as a way of making a living. So they bleached his body, and did a little marketing. And the funny thing is that after she told the story, he was still able to go out and give speeches and stuff. People wanted to hear it. So
They didn't have wetsuits in.
I don't know if that would happen today with all the media. I don't think he'd get away with as much. But and another question is, what's the difference between sperm oil and whale oil?
sperm whale is 90% of its body is where you get regular whale oil. The way that makes the sperm whale special was in its head. it has this pool of liquid called spermaceti.
Oh, right.
And it's a very high grade oil that they used for making candles, and it was a lubricant. The spermaceti was basically what made it, which created the, what I want to say, lubrication, so that the Industrial Revolution could happen. Because up until then, they only knew how to keep machinery cool using water, and that didn't, that didn't work well. And when they started using sperm whale oil, that's why I used the watch in the beginning as an example. It just worked wonders. So that's why the sperm whales were so heavily hunted. And they had to go around the world. That's why they had to go so far to do it too, because the Nantucketers, by the end of the 1700s, had chased them so often that they'd already depleted the population. So, but it was just highly regarded. And there's also something called ambergris. Joshua, do you know about that?
Yeah.
And it's basically whale poop. And that was literally worth its weight in gold. They used to use it in women's perfume and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
It still is valuable, and somebody just found a bunch
You really?
10
Wow.
days ago or something. It did make the news.
Yes.
Well,
Somebody made
Interesting.
a lot of money on whale poop just a couple weeks ago. True.
Yep. Yeah. It's a
I
lot of
don't
that
know.
whale poop going around.
yeah. What is the population of the sperm whales today, and where are they usually found today?
That is something somebody would have to research. I haven't kept up with that. I mean, they hunted them to the point of, nearly to the point of extinction, where they would chase them when they started running out along the African coast. Then they started going chasing them into the Pacific, and they would chase them all the way up to the Arctic. And it just, became rarer and rarer to see them. But one of the cool things about the sperm whale was that, when they're out there in the ocean and it's flat and you can't see anything going on, and they would see a whale spout, and you could tell by the spout whether it was a sperm whale or not, because all whales had a spout that was just vertical, except for the sperm whale had one that went out at a 45-degree angle. So it was like waving a flag.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But, they were, they used it, everything they could do. They made money bringing the bones back too.
Yeah.
And
Of course.
a lot of trips they would, if their ship was full and somebody else was heading home with only a partial load, they'd send them home with as much as they could take and stay there and whale some more. And they would also work together. Sometimes one ship would keep hunting and another ship would just keep the try-works going and boiling down the blubber and stuff. So it was quite an industry. And in 1835, it was the biggest industry in the United States. It wasn't until they found oil underground that started changing. And the other thing was such a horrible profession. And what happened near the end was that a lot of when Nantucket and New Bedford and this part of the world started running short of whales, a lot of California started chasing them. And it was not unusual for young men who wanted to go west and chase gold to get on board a whale ship and sail to California, and whole crews, including the captains, a lot of times abandoned ship, and that's what really killed the whaling industry. Just it wasn't viable anymore, and that's probably a good thing. And it's being Norwegian, I know what Norway was famous for. To devised all sorts of nasty stuff to chase whales even into the 20th century. But it's not out, it's not the industry it used to be by any means.
Okay, were there any other questions for Nils for the about the book? I think we ought to get in some insight in what you're working on next before we say goodbye. I would love to know what your next venture is, literature venture.
I've got a few stories I'm working on. One of them is Peleg's brother, who I really can't say much about without giving away the ending, but I proved his death through circumstantial evidence that I've gathered that would hold up, I believe, in any courtroom. I've got another book. Since I started doing this and had the contact with Brian on his book and another historian who died 10 years ago, I'm working on a book about the bombing of Dresden during World War II. And it's huge. What happened was I met a guy at a dinner party and sat across the table from him, and there were just two of us and four women. And he started talking, and all I could think is, this is going to be a long evening. He was so boring. And then I had just finished up getting my master's at Suffolk University. And he said, well, what'd you major in? I said, journalism and writing. I said, but my specialty, I did a 2-year study on propaganda because I used to be involved in politics. And he said, I have something you might find interesting. And he was a captain in the United States Air Force. He was a bombing expert. And during the Cold War, he'd gotten help from Willie Brandt to go over the wall, go into the Russian sector and go to the library and do research on the bombing of Dresden. And he spoke German. He actually snuck some documents out, which amazed me when I realized that. And he knew he was dying and didn't tell me. And he gave me all his work, including his doctorate thesis on the bombing of Dresden, and said, please do something with this.
Oh,
So I have 5 file cabinets full of documents, pictures, things that have never been seen before. And I'm working on that. It's a huge project because most of the stuff that's been written is about the German and the British side of things. And this is a take from the American side. And so I have a handwritten document to a letter to my friend from Albert Speer, Hitler's henchman. I have letters from a lot of the biggest players in that theater of the war. And then because of my propaganda thing, as I've been working on this, I realize that the stuff that I have is actually information that the Russians used to begin the Cold War. The Russians inflated the numbers of the people who were killed there and stuff like that. So
Wow,
it's kind of grim, but it's
interesting.
yep.
Interesting
That-
slice of history.
Yeah, and it's just you people all understand when you're a history nut and you don't get that much of a chance to talk to friends about it because you have them over for dinner. You can tell who doesn't care because they're sitting at the table going. So,
Hey,
and I'm not particularly interested in just babble. So,
well, we're glad you're putting all this in writing.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful it's been fascinating. I feel enriched by what you've shared with us. I haven't read the book. I have to read the book so we can get the book. How do we get the book? On Amazon, or how do you want us to get the book?
what I really would like is if you visit the NyeMuseum.org and order through them, because I do it as a fundraiser for the
Great.
museum. But I've got to tell you too, I hadn't heard about you folks until we started looking into the Nickerson barn a few months ago. And I think what you're doing is just wonderful.
Well, thank you.
When I was younger, I used to do floor sanding for my best friend and his father. And I got to go in some of those old Chatham houses. And it was just incredible to me where you'd see a teak wood floor that was laid out with teak wood that had been brought back from the South Pacific, and murals on the walls. And we'd be ripping up a board and I would find nails, and I'm thinking, these nails are 200-300 years old. That's incredible.
Wow, that is, and thank you for that segue. Because we are doing films. Actually, Fred Murthine, I think, is here, and he's the filmmaker. He's been doing films. We just finished the Sail Off series, but the fundraiser, the online auction, is to raise money to do films, to showcase what you've just been describing, and that every house has a story, and we don't want to lose those stories. You've captured this Peleg Nye story in a book, which is wonderful. But these houses, if we destroy.
Did we lose Eileen for a minute?
A little slow, Ellen. I'm not hearing you.
Eileen, sorry.
Oh, well, her feed has slowed down.
Glass
Yeah.
factories on.
There she is.
Sorry, what'd you say?
We missed about your last minute of talk, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, your feed sometimes.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
sorry. So where did I leave off? Caroline, you take it from where I left it off. Because I don't know what you heard.
I don't either. I got distracted.
Oh, my
Anyway.
goodness. No. All right. Well, I'll just start over again, right? The online auctions is to support the filmmaking of these stories, and we really need to raise money to do it. Fred Murthine has been with us tonight, and he is the filmmaker, and we have and Joshua Smith is a writer, and we have a wonderful team to produce these films. We just need to raise monies to do it. So please go to our website, Protect Our Past, and check out the really cool items that we have there. It's not just stuff, it's experiences. The glass museum and sandwiches, there's an auction item about that. There's one about the Nye Museum, and it just goes on from there. Really cool stuff. So I thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Neil.
Oh, someone had to go and cook dinner, so they've gone. So I think it's time to wind it up. But thank you so much. I'm just enriched by having you share the history of the Peleg Nye, and I'm going to get that book, and I hope everybody else does too.
Okay.
And we'll look forward to your next book, Nils. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
having
very
me.
much, Nils. Nice meeting you again.
Yes.
Any of you who would like to email me or get in touch, you're welcome to. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
And your email
have-
is?
I'll type it in.
Okay.
Tell me though.
NVBockmann@gmail.com.
And Jim probably needs to get in touch with you to see where you two connect.
He needs an umlaut. He needs an umlaut on the O.
I found one in the book.
That's great.
Just make sure you put the two N's in there. That's usually where people fall short, but we didn't get it. But,
That get that.
Right to me, I have it. And I do see the book is on the Nye family website. Here it is. So easy to locate the nyemuseum.org website. Just go to shop and then books, and there it is.
Yep.
So
And if you just want to experience the past, go to the Nye Museum. It is so well done, and it envelops you, the property as well as the building. So enjoy that, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for being with us tonight.
thank you.
Look forward
Happy
to it.
summer solstice, almost.
Yes,
Thanks,
yes,
everybody.
almost.
Thanks, Nil. Keep in touch.
Bye-bye.
I will.
Bye.